right, welcome back. This is the Something Venture podcast. I am Kent Lindstrom. I am your host. My guest today is Howard Morgan. How are you doing?
Doing well.
Well, thanks so much for doing this. I'll give you just a brief bit of Howard's background. I think in one of the great internet understatements, the Google slug for your Wikipedia page sums it up as angel investor, which a little bit more to it than that. A professor first at Wharton and Penn. Then he started Renaissance Technologies, which is a place where you famously can't get a job unless you're practically a professor yourself. A few things between that and the next thing, which was found Josh Koppelman and started First Round, which is one of the most, if not the most respected seed venture capital firms. And then after that, joined B Capital, which is a later stage firm than First Round, doing growth capital. So that's a heck of a career you've put together here.
You get old enough, you do a lot of different things, and I like doing lots of different things.
That's right. How did it start that you animated? You started as a professor, which is where a lot of people kind of end up. How did you animate out of that into starting a hedge fund? And probably at a time where not every person with a computer called themselves a hedge fund or venture capitalist guy.
No, in 1982, that it wasn't very popular yet. Look, I was very lucky. I got into computers really early as a professor, and that was my PhD was in 1968, long before most of your listeners were born. And so there were a lot of easy problems to solve in computer science then. I was an expert on databases. I was an expert on what we called in the 70s the offices of the future. We call it today the office, things like email, having the Philadelphia Inquirer write, Dr. Morgan believes that someday executives will type their own emails and will need fewer secretaries. I got picketed by the secretaries, but I think I got it right.
Yeah.
We did research on multi-windowing systems at the same time as Xerox PARC was doing it. We were doing it with color as opposed to black and white stuff. And in the late 70s, like 77, 78, I spent a summer out at the Rand Corporation here in Santa Monica, which is where I'm visiting today. And a friend of mine decided to start a company, which was the first licensee for Unix. Up until 1978, Bell Labs would only license Unix to universities under trade secret licenses. So we were able to get them to give a commercial license for Unix. And he was able to find another professor friend of his, a guy named Peter Wiener, found a professor friend of his named Jim Simons, who was able to fund it. And I met Jim. And a couple of years later, Jim, who was at the time head of mathematics at Stony Brook, but also doing investing in quant fund investing, said, gee, we should start something that we can do both venture and quant in. And that was Renaissance Technologies, which is today, as you point out, one of the premier hedge funds, certainly noted as the best quant fund ever created. With their internal fund, it's now internal, has had a 38% net IRR for the last, I guess it's 35 years or something now. So, which is kind of unheard of. And the good news is most of that money is going to the Simons Foundation to support scientific and mathematics research around the world. So it's doing well. But that's how I got into it. He said, take 2 years off, which you can do at that time. So I took a 2-year leave of absence from the University of Pennsylvania. I was a tenured full professor, and I never came back. I just enjoyed what I was doing.
And how did the computer, I'm kind of fascinated by this, and I reach back into my memory to this time sort of before, I guess for me, it's the internet, where the first time you saw it and applied it to something, it was just incredible. Like the first time you logged into a server in Minnesota from San Diego, it was just incredible. I guess you sort of had asymmetric access to computers at this time. Is that correct?
Oh, asymmetric access to computers. And the fact was that in 1972, when I came to Penn, my research was supported by DARPA and the Navy, and they said, we're going to put an ARPANET node. So I had node 50 on the ARPANET.
Wow.
So there's now 5 billion people on the internet today, but I was in that first group of the first 100, if you will, with machine 50 on the net. So the first big change was the beginnings of email. And the second was actually splitting the screen and doing things where our database was being used by project at MIT and connecting to another project at Stanford, all on the screen at the same time. So all of that was happening in 73, 4, 5 for me, and began to see what the world could be like. And the world eventually is like that. I think I pretty much was able to predict and describe what was going to happen up until the iPhone days. We all knew that there would be a device that you would carry, but I don't think any of us quite understood how pervasive and how quickly the iPhone would become pervasive, or the equivalent of the handheld device that you could carry with you. And some of us, like Nicholas Negroponte and others, knew that. Nicholas used to say, everything that's on a wire today is going to be wireless, and everything that's wired today is going to be on a wire, and was pretty much right. Television was wireless then, and now it's all on cable, right? And right. and the phones were all wired, and now they're all wireless. So there were people who foresaw some of this, but the breadth of applications and the ability to bring it to the masses is something that I think we didn't quite see. We saw how to bring it to business, but we didn't see how to bring it to the masses.
And so when you started applying computer technology to trading, was it just like a shooting gallery for you? Like you had the power and no one else did at this point?
Pretty much Renaissance did, and they had the power. It wasn't just applying computers, it was applying very sophisticated mathematics and statistics. But what it took was data. And the thing Renaissance had then and still has today, even though I'm no longer associated with it in any formal way, is a database that goes back now 50 years of every tick and every trade, and no one else was collecting that. In fact, in the late 90s, Renaissance had more processors per employee than Google, and more storage for a while. That obviously changed, but. Right. But it is the case that in the 70s and in the 80s rather and early 90s, there was nobody who had the database and the computing power that Renaissance had, applying it to the markets to market trading in a systematic way.
And what is and I know it's you're not involved right now, but the sort of intellectual, I just find it fascinating, the sort of intellect that you were seeking, probably still seeking. What was that? It's not just the smartest option trader out of Chicago, right? It was something.
Clearly not. I mean, Renaissance tries not to hire anyone in their research group who has any knowledge of the markets. They don't want people to think about these as stock markets. They want to think about these as time series of numbers that you're predicting, and ways to get alternative data and additional data sets to get additional numbers that you can apply. And the only people at Renaissance who know about the markets are the people who have to execute the trades. Right. And there's a lot of sophistication in how to execute trades so you don't spoil the markets in the process. Right. But from the research point of view, they don't hire anyone who's a market person. They hire astrophysicists and statisticians and computer scientists and some ML people now and so on who don't know the markets.
Right. It's almost like the science fiction book Ender's Game, where he's playing like a simulation, but it's actually happening out, happening out in the real world. Why hasn't it been competed away? I mean, everyone, else can go hire these types of people, and how does that sustain?
It keeps getting tried. I mean, there are a couple of people who've done very well at it for modest periods of time, like Two Sigma, which is a great firm, and AQR. But most of them try to. They don't have the kind of university research collaboration that Renaissance has. Most of them end up with individual people getting sort of becoming stars and creating their own ideas and so on. Renaissance is really a collective of taking all the best ideas, integrating them into a model which has changed every month. So most people also try to find a model that works. Renaissance has found a way to create a living model that gets changed every month. Signals get added, signals get dropped in order to make it work.
Yeah. So pretty much a career capper. You start, this company that's become one of the most successful in its category. But then how do you get to the other end of the capital spectrum, which is venture, which is a very long,
yes, I talk about my barbell investing strategy. I either trade for 10 microseconds or 10 years, right? So when we started Renaissance, and this is a part that's sort of not much in the history books on Renaissance, We had $70 million under management, and the models could only handle 35 million. So we
Okay.
put the other 35 million into venture. And from April 82 to sort of 1990, half the money was in venture and half the money was in quant trading. So we actually did quite a lot of venture in that period. We invested in a company called Scilink, which was the
Yeah.
Diffie-Hellman methodology to compete with RSA, which ended up going public. We invested in Segway Software. We invested in Quarterdeck, which was a pretty big company in the early PC days, and so on. And we had a very good venture operation, which I ran, which delivered a 25% IRR.
Great.
But in 1990, we said, look, the venture is delivering a 25% IRR. It takes 5 or 7 years to get liquid. We now have the ability to handle $1 billion in the quant, and it's delivering 38% IRR. And we can cash it in tomorrow morning and go home.
Right.
So we took the venture out of Renaissance Technologies, and I continued to do venture kind of on my own, sitting in the same office physically next to Jim Simons, and still doing the venture things with my own money. With occasionally I'd ask Jim, and he would come in with me, and I had a few other friends, never as a fund, but just doing investing. And we did a large number of investments from 1990 to 2004 that were very successful, including 2 with Josh Koppelman. One was his first company, Infonautics, which went public in 96. And then after that, he started Half.com, which got sold to eBay in 2000, 2001 period. And that worked out very well. And we also helped Rose start Idealab in 1996.
Right.
So I'm still on the board there, and we've been creating companies at Idealab since 1996. It's sort of the first real incubator.
Yeah, the venture history is I was just going that book about the history of venture. I forget what it's called, but Power Law. It had and I had just gotten to the part that I thought was so interesting in the context of today, valuations being so high, where they'd founded Fairchild Semiconductors and the venture firm got like 70% for a couple $100,000.
Yeah.
And then they started their next company, and the venture capitalists were outraged that they got 25% of the company for $2.5 million. And that was Intel. And so it seems like venture capitalists have been outraged about valuations at every stage of the game.
Always.
Although I guess we're kind of in an extraordinary time now. What was it like at the time, like being in a before first round? Like what was the landscape like?
Well, investing in the 80s, you had, Kleiner Perkins started with a $7 million fund. We actually had a $35 million fund, which was a big fund at that time. We did do a lot of investing in California, but we also did investing in other places. We invested in a company called Crystal Vision, which was one of the first LCD producers, which went bankrupt. So we saw that side of the world. And we invested in a printer company that built the first LED-based printers, laser printers, for IBM and then for many other people, which did spectacularly well over the years. Eventually, we sold it to management and let them do the end-of-life play. What it was like was there was more collaboration. I would meet with John Doerr and talk about deals with him and some of the other key players there. The Sequoia guys, Don Valentine and Moritz and so on. And there was more sharing of deals, and that sharing of deals and collaboration sort of went on until the late 90s, when it fell apart as everybody got too greedy in the internet bubble, bubble one, as I call it, the first internet bubble.
Right. And then what in that landscape did you see that said, we're missing something, and Josh Koppelman and I are going to put it together? And how did you, I guess you'd invested in Josh.
So I had invested in Josh twice, obviously. I really liked him. I guess he liked me as well. When his wife did not want to move to California, so he didn't want to stay with eBay, even though Meg Whitman really wanted him to. And he said, gee, I'd like to do some more angel investing. He had done a little bit of angel investing with some of what's called the PayPal mafia that basically became, because he was at eBay and they came into eBay. He was an early investor in LinkedIn, for example. And he said, I think there's an opportunity right now Because when we started Infonautics in 1992, it cost us $5 million to get the first product out. We had to buy computers and servers and Oracle licenses, and we had to staff up for people to run those servers 24/7 and all sorts of things. When we started half.com, which was started sort of 7 years later, it only cost $2 million because we now had open source software. Prices of PCs had come down. There were people who would put the computers in racks for you and kind of oversee them for you. So you didn't have to hire quite as much staff. And then after he left eBay, we started a company called Turntide, which was a anti-spam routing company that got sold in like 6 or 7 months to Symantec. And it only cost $750,000 because there was so much. And so he said to me in 04, said, I think we could create an early stage fund, a seed stage fund, because we can own, 10, 15% of a company for $250,000, and I think that we can create good companies with very little money. You can start a company today for $500,000. That was in those days. Today, you can start a web app company or a mobile app company for 20 grand if you want. Yeah. He said, and then if they grow, we can raise more money for them. And I said, that sounds like a great idea. How about if I give you half time for a year? And he said, well, that's great because I only want to put half time in for a year as well. So the first year at First Round Capital, we raised $7 million, mostly our own money and friends and family. One institution, or corporate investor, which was Comcast, who he had been working with. And, we said we did 14 investments, and we had a hook, which was, the biggest thing in creating a new venture fund is what sourcing differentiation you have. How do you find deals? And in those days, there was a conference called the Demo Conference. It was a couple of times a year. Chris Shipley ran it, and she would vet 1,000 companies and let 100 present. And all the venture capitalists would come out and press would come out and you'd see these new companies. Well, we made a deal with her to be able to look at those companies before the show. And so we had an interesting source of companies. And we had our own sources, of course, as well. And most of what we did was from our own sources, but it gave us an extra hook into things. And we did a lot of interesting companies in those days in that first fund. And at the end of year one, when we had made 48 trips to California, Josh made 22, I made 26. And we decided we actually liked it. We were going to go full time. So we became full time and we hired 2 other people. We hired Rob Hayes in San Francisco and Chris Fralick in Philadelphia and New York.
Yep. Almost like a little trading trick there, getting the information ahead of everyone else.
Exactly.
by a couple days.
Exactly. Well, that's why Sequoia funded YC. Sequoia was able to get early access to Y Combinator group.
Yep. And why at this? I've always wondered about this. There was this golden age. You hear about this golden age of seed funds where there was one or maybe just a couple, soft tech as well, very few seed funds. And yet none of them, I'm curious what this says about venture capital, none of them was in Airbnb and Uber and Pinterest and Twitter. Like, none of them.
I've just lost you. I've just lost your audio.
Can you hear me?
Now I can.
Oh, sorry about that. Yeah. I'll cut that. But I was asking about the issue of like during this period, there's a golden age of there's very few seed funds that presumably own the whole market, and yet none of them is in everything. None of them is in Airbnb and Uber and Pinterest, and you think they'd have been in the whole thing.
Well, to some extent, Ron Conway's SV Angels was, right, because they acted like an index fund. So both Josh and I asked our spouses about Airbnb. We liked the guys a lot. And we said, would you let me rent out the couch for the night? And the answer was resounding no.
Yeah.
Right. Because we were just, even then, I forget about my age, but even Josh at the time was too old. And our families were too old. So we just didn't get it. I mean, on that one. Uber, we obviously got because we started it in our San Francisco office.
Yeah.
So that one worked out pretty well for us. And Roblox, we got because Chris Fralick's son Max was 8 years old and pitched the firm on Roblox on why it was so great.
Yeah.
But Pinterest was for a company that I saw and Josh saw at the New York Angels actually before right around the time we're starting the first round. It's called Totes, and it was a completely different company, and so we didn't do it. But by the time it had pivoted to become Pinterest, it was too late for the seed fund to get in.
Yeah. I think the Airbnb thing fascinates me. And kind of the lesson I take away from it is when people are using your platform to make a living, you're onto something. And so when eBay was tapping into the entrepreneurial energy of, people who are like, hey, I can quit my job and sell little plastic things or whatever it was. And the first time I was in it, it was a Lyft, I think, before Uber, but kind of the same concept.
Mm-hmm.
And I asked the driver, like, how, what are you doing? Is this young woman? And she's like, oh, well, I go to SF State. I'm doing this. I'm paying my tuition.
Yep.
And as soon as you hear that, you're like, man, that means she is an entrepreneur, or is a whatever, her own business person is using your platform. You're onto something. And I think with Airbnb, it was, hey, I'm paying the mortgage during the financial crisis. That's what I'm doing.
Sure. I mean, we had TaskRabbit. We had a couple of other investments at first round that followed that model, and I agree with you on that model. If other people are making a living on your platform, you're onto something. Yeah, absolutely.
And how important is the venture capitalist? Every venture capitalist says, "Oh, the guy came along and I advised him and I told him to put an extra, told her to do this or the other thing." How important, after putting the money in, is the venture capitalist in the narrative of a company, or should they even be?
Well, so one of the reasons first round it became so popular, powerful, whatever, successful, I think, was the first round network, where we felt that we wanted to help the companies, but it wasn't just the venture capitalists helping them. It was our way of getting the companies the right kind of help at the right time from the right people. For example, we created a network where all the CEOs and CTOs could talk to one another. Now, remember, if you're the CTO of a 6-person company, you have no peer group. Right. What we did was to give you instantly a peer group of our other 60 investments at the time. And you could ask a question and all those CTOs would see it. And very likely one of them had the same problem you had, and they would answer you very quickly. And for one of our best examples was Mint. We invested in Mint at the beginning. Mint was the first company to win TechCrunch Disrupt the first year it happened. And they were geared up for a beta audience to sign up, and they were geared up to sign up a couple of thousand people. And when Aaron won Mint, it was I don't know, it was a Thursday evening, I think. All of a sudden, 20,000 people tried to sign up, and the website sort of melted. And Aaron sent out a note to the first round group saying, can somebody help me tune my SQL? I'm having real problems with it. And among the other responses he got was the cell phone for Martin Nykorn, the CEO of MySQL.
Yeah.
So Aaron, now I was the first editor of the ACM database journal. I'm a database expert, but he didn't call me and say, what should I do? Rob Hayes was the partner on the thing. He basically put out the note to the network. And because we had built this gated community network, he got Martin's number. He called Martin. It was 3 a.m. in Germany. Martin answered, and he said, very politely, it's 3 a.m. here, but I'll tell you what to do. He says, call these guys. They just tuned Facebook's MySQL, and they're in your area code. Yes. So he called those guys, and they said, what are your buffers like? And they said, oh, no, you got to increase your buffer sizes to 4 gigabytes. So he did that and signed up 21,000 people. Right now, he got help from the venture capitalists, but he didn't get it directly from me saying, oh, you should do this, although it's an idea that most database people understand. But he got it from the network that we had created at first round. And we have so many examples over the decades now of first round where the community helps one another. And that's really powerful. OIC tapped into that. Andreessen followed us and created their own sort of platform network. At B Capital, we have a big platform as well now. Yeah. So I think that's how venture capitalists can help. It's not that the venture now, there are cases where they do want to talk to the VC. And the biggest one of those is, how do I fire my co-founder?
Right.
That's and that happens all too often, unfortunately.
Yep.
And there, venture capitalists can help. And obviously, we help with raising the next rounds because we know the players who they should talk to.
Yeah. Is there magic in Silicon Valley? Is it that concept of people helping each other and running into each other? Or is that a kind of an idea that's, maybe past us with Zoom and all of that?
Oh, I think it's past. I mean, look, if you look at it in 2015, all the unicorns were in Silicon Valley. And now 20% of the unicorns are Silicon Valley based. It's about 30% in China, by the way, which most people ignore, and the rest are scattered all over the place. So the advantage of Silicon Valley and Malaby's book, the Parallel book, talks about the fact that California has no non-compete laws. You can't enforce non-competes. So people can leave your company and go to another company. And the ethos out there is you stay at a company a couple of years, you get your options to vest, and then you move to the next one if you're a startup type person, right? Yeah. And that's something that couldn't happen in Massachusetts because they had very tough non-compete in Massachusetts, and everybody enforced them.
Right. Do you think technology, from a venture investing perspective, is technology still having as big an incremental impact? You think of, spreadsheets come along, Lotus 1, 2, 3, and all of a sudden maybe the M&A market takes off because now people can analyze things, or, the mobile phone comes out and, all of a sudden people are calling Ubers. And now I'm kind of in that Louis C.K. joke where you're like on the airplane and the Wi-Fi doesn't work and you're kind of annoyed, right? Like, are the technology innovations still having as big an impact as they used to, or do I have a kind of a rosy vision of the past?
They're still having a gigantic impact, and particularly in areas in the industrial area. So we're at B Capital, one of our focus is in industrial transportation, logistics, and things where the current state of technology in many of those companies is underserved. The IoT area is exploding. The ability to have sensors, the use of AI everywhere, machine learning, data science is exploding. I think there's a lot more that technology is doing. I don't see any signs of it abating anytime soon. At B Capital, one of our first investments was a company called Ninja Van, and they figured out how to use technology to do a better job of delivering packages during Southeast Asia. Right now, if you have FedEx delivering you something, you get an email from do-not-reply@fedex.com saying, Kent, here's your tracking number, right? What Ninja Van does, you get a WhatsApp that says, Kent, I have a package to deliver to you tomorrow afternoon. How should I do it? And you say things like, well, my address is 1665 Appian Way, but what you have to do is go around the back. There's a yellow door, and knock on that yellow door. That's where you'll find me. Yeah. As a result, they have a 97% first delivery rate, delivery on first try, whereas the other guys, DHL and FedEx, are in the low 80s. So they have started to dominate the delivery market in Thailand and Singapore and Vietnam and a whole bunch of countries, including they're starting in India now and Indonesia. So that and because they're using the cell phones in new ways with chatbot technology, so automated AI technology to get that information.
And how did you come to be at B Capital which was the Eduardo Saverin later stage company? How did you come to be there from, you're already at a perfectly good venture capital firm?
I was at a great venture capital firm. I'm very proud of having helped build First Round. Josh and I started it. And when we started it, I said to Josh, look, I'm 60 years old. I'll give you 10 years because I think that one of the things venture firms don't do well, many of them, is generational transition, is opening up the ability for new people to become partners. So in year 8, I said, I said 10 years and I meant it. And so I'm going to step back and let's figure out how to do that. And we did. We figured out we call it a glide path. And I started it. 2 other partners have been on that glide path as well, which you become a board partner and so on. You tail down a bit. And I announced that I was going to step back from First Round for all those good reasons. I'm still a huge LP at First Round. I'm a huge supporter of it and a huge fan of it. Okay. And in fact, but when I did, I got 100 emails of, would you join my seed fund? And of course, the answer to that was no. Been there, done that.
Right.
I like to do new and different things. And Raj Ganguly, who I had known from various industry events, called and said, gee, Eduardo and I are coming to New York. Can you give us a half an hour? We want to tell you about what we're going to do. And they came to New York, and 3 hours later, I said, wow, this is really interesting. I'd love to be a big LP. And they said, no, we really want your help in building this firm the way you built Renaissance and Ideal Lab and First Round. And what we want for you to do is help us make new mistakes and not repeat the mistakes you made building those other firms.
Right.
And that's kind of what I've done. I set the processes. I put in that we knew worked. I set policies that we knew worked, hiring. But what excited me was, particularly at the beginning, it was global. First round was not global. First round was only US and Canada, with extremely minor exceptions. It was focused on B2B, where I thought the opportunities were going to be, because I thought consumer, not that there won't be new consumer companies all the time, but that it had been sort of heavily mined for a while, and I was more interested in B2B. It was going to be, B stage and later, which I thought was important, and it had a partnership with the Boston Consulting Group, with BCG. And we have a very close partnership with BCG. We just recently re-signed another 10-year deal with them. So we are their growth tech partner, and we help them, they help us in many, many ways.
And so is the BCG idea that you have much different challenges at large growth stage companies than a startup that's trying to figure out the co-founder and the office space. Yeah.
Exactly. And BCG, for example, has the world's experts on software pricing. So when we have a company like Icertis, which is contract management, and it's when we invest, typically those companies have 10 to 20 million of revenue, even more sometimes. We arrange a BCG engagement, and the BCG guys come in and they say, "Gee, you're leaving a lot of money on the table. Here's how you should price."
Yeah.
Or here's how you should compensate your sales and marketing people, or et cetera. So BCG has huge expertise in helping slightly later stage companies, which is different than what happens at the early stage.
That's great. Well, just a couple final things I'll ask you. What do you make of the migration? It seems like there's been a migration of capital from public markets, where Renaissance is doing its work, to private markets, where so much more value and capital is in the private markets. Any particular implication of that you look at?
I think we've seen that for a couple of reasons. One was that it became so much harder to take companies public, and that all happened in what was called the Big Bang, when the New York Stock Exchange and others stopped trading in 8ths and 16ths. So instead of having 12.5 cents per share split between the brokers, for them to be able to, and they used that money to support research, to take really small companies public and keep them going. You went down to 1/10 of a cent commission. So there was no money for them to support it. Hence, you have no small cap market anymore.
Right.
And that means you have to stay private longer because you can't go public. So that pushed for more money in the private markets. You saw the creation of secondary markets, as you saw with Facebook early on, and then many others, SpaceX and others today, where you can buy their stock if you really want to, not as an individual, but certainly as a big accredited investor. And so it has distorted things, because it used to be that all the money was made in the public markets after the company went public. Apple, Microsoft, you look at any of those, Amazon, and all the big money was made by holding those stocks after they became public.
Right.
Then for a while, we got to the point where, things like Facebook came out at 36 and traded down to 20. Right. Now, wisely, when it did that, I bought, and Eduardo bought even more shares than he, and so on. And it's now up to 300. But most people felt that it was over, that all the money had been taken out in the private markets.
Yeah.
So and the other thing is that because interest rates went to zero, all of the institutional investors were seeking to make money, went to the private markets and poured too much money into the venture capital and growth capital space.
Yeah.
And so there's a lot of competition there, and that pushed valuations up beyond where they should be.
Yeah, I would think Eduardo would be okay on Facebook stock, but I guess he found room for some more.
In some sense, he probably made as much or more money on Facebook stock after it went public by buying it at the lows. Yeah.
Is there a bound to these company value? Somewhere in the last 10 years, people's brains shifted from thinking a company could be worth $1 billion to $50 billion to 100 billion, to this concept that a company can be worth $1 trillion, which just didn't, it didn't used to be a thing, right? Like I remember John Doerr talking about a company. He's like, this thing could be worth $1 billion someday. And that's just a speed bump now.
Well, it is. And for a number of reasons. One is that we have in 2000, when you think about the internet, we had 20 million people on dial-up lines.
Yeah.
Okay. Today we have 2 to 3 billion people on broadband 24/7. So the size of the market has expanded so dramatically that you really can support much bigger valuations. Is it supportable everywhere? No. Can companies grow into it? Yes. Are there trillion or 2 trillion, or Apple's case, $3 trillion companies? It's a little scary, right? I mean, but they generate a couple of $100 billion of profit. Yeah, they're worth it.
The math makes sense. Well, let me. I'll finish with this. Most people I'd say, "Oh, that's a heck of a career you've had. Good job." But obviously, you always seem to have more chapters. So, what are you looking forward to now? What's animating you for the next 20 years?
So what's animating me, first of all, B Capital is animating me for a while. I also told them I'd give them 10 years. So I'm only 5 into it. So they got a little more time. Is longevity, because obviously at my age, I'm trying to think about longevity and how do I live a healthy life and keep my mind sharp and so on, mind and body sharp. And we're in an age where we're learning so much about how to do that. And I'm working with a number of companies, but also with Peter Diamandis and the X Prize. We're doing a longevity X Prize to try to figure out what can we do to help people live longer, healthier lives. And that's animating me a lot. I mean, my wife says to retire, you have to tire and then you can retire. And since I've never tired, I don't think of myself as retiring anytime soon. And
that doesn't seem in the cards.
Investing in, yes. The great thing about investing is you don't have to. You can do that, until pretty much the day you die. If and I do assume I will die. I don't assume that even all that we're doing on longevity will keep me alive forever. Nor do I think I want to do that.
You don't think there's the escape? What's the escape velocity or whatever it is? If you hang on till, don't say if you hang on till XYZ, we'll have the thing.
No, I do think it's conceivable that we could download my brain into something.
Yeah.
And reboot it later on. And I've been reading some interesting sci-fi about that, but I'm not sure, how that works, or will work long term.
What an amazing story. I appreciate you're doing this. I assume you don't really want people to get in touch with you, but I assume they can check out First Round. Well, if people haven't checked out
B Capital. I'm no longer. If they want to get in touch with me, they Howard at bcapgroup.com. But I don't guarantee to answer every email.
That's right. So you're not, if somebody emails you and says, what's the formula for Renaissance, you're not going to send them the algorithm.
That one, there's a whole bunch. One of the things Renaissance does is their non-competes are tougher than most of the other players because they're training everybody so well. They have a 5-year non-competes, which they enforce pretty ruthlessly. So no, I won't tell you the algorithm.
That's right.
But it doesn't matter because even if I did, it's changing every month.
Yeah. It just I'm just curious as we say this, with hedge funds, does anybody understand the algorithm anymore, or have the machines taken over to a point where you don't actually comprehend?
So one of the reasons Renaissance stayed away from neural nets and machine learning and so on for decades was exactly that. So yeah, the answer is the chief scientist at Renaissance, the person who approves what signals go into the model and come out of the model, in that sense, does understand the model, or at least knows a lot about what it's doing. Yeah. It's not complete black box kind of thing to those people, but it's to very few people who get to the level where they're able to or allowed to understand that much of the model.
Yeah, fascinating. All right, well, thanks so much for doing this. I appreciate it.
Thank you. I enjoyed it.
All right, this has been
your listeners like it.
I'm sure they will. This has been the Something About Your podcast. Howard Morgan, the guest. Talk to you next time.